we can actually open it up to the audience already. I won't do a kind of a long summary. Our program says that I'm the summary, but actually I think that the papers resonate really strongly. They kind of, all of them, elaborate of what you just ended up in relation to Foucault's notion of homo economicus, but actually of how that needs to be unfolded in relation to the specific cultural techniques that take new forms in relation to technological infrastructures. And this kind of movement from channeling of affects in various ways talked about in relation to shaming and shaming to the infrastructural is the kind of a big scale across which we can move and address questions, and also in relation to methods as well. So questions, audience, please. There's one here. Can we get the mic, please?
Yeah, this is in response to your comment, your talk on shaming and all of that. I wonder if so it seems like we all as people are pushing so in this positive direction, right? We have these platforms that are really like encouraging all of these positive data points to create this persona that's like, it's us, it's the plus us, and that's all that we're doing. And so I get it. It seems so natural then and obvious that there would be these kinds of like shaming cultures to arise and these platforms to come. And it's the complete antithesis of that. They come and they're like the worst that they could be because we're all being the best that we could be or showing only that light. And do you see in this like a need for web platforms to develop that are really trying to take more of a middle ground to prevent like these extreme shaming groups from popping up? If there was a way that communication through the internet and platforms to develop that were really trying to be, I don't know how this would work, but more of a balanced position of ourselves where people would feel comfortable having that. I guess Facebook does try and like not be so like positive heavy. Like you have the whole, there were the articles that came up of the year in review and people like saying, oh, they were sharing these horrible moments, and then it got shared right back to them. So yeah, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that, of maybe like platforms developing in more of a middle ground to try and prevent some of these extreme shaming sites.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm trying to think through that, and mostly what I find is, when you look at Facebook or Instagram or a lot of the social media platforms, which are intensely social, they're completely antisocial, really, or asocial, right? And their understanding of the social is so poor, right? Because it's all about connectivity, right? It's all about, connecting people in one way or another. So that thinking about alternatives right now, it can be very difficult, okay? Because there's no thinking about the social and what does it mean to be social or to relate to each other. So I kind of like, in my work, I'm just having this like big detour at this point into what is called relational psychoanalysis and into subjectivity, right? And going back to the question of ethics, if you want, and the ethics of the other, to kind of redevelop a critical vocabulary to think about what is the social, right? Beyond connectivity. So, so that's where I am. I'm stuck. I'm stuck in there right now, and hopefully we'll go somewhere. Thanks.
Thank you. Can I at this point actually go back to Greg's first presentation? You ended up with a note that I kind of want to ask you to elaborate it, because it sounds really intriguing in terms of the historical context, but also, well, you ended up with accountancy and accountability and so forth. Would you care to just tell us a bit more about that and kind of relate to what we've been just talking about?
Well, I guess accounting as an industry or as a practice emerged the late 1800s in a very particular time. It was pre-industrial. It was a shift from one form of capitalism to another. So there was a crisis. There was a crisis in valuation. There was a crisis in profitability. And so I find that historical juncture to be somewhat analogous, or at least a helpful framework to think about what's happened kind of post 9/11 in the context of the emergence of social media and the commodification of life, of affect, of some things that Ganaele has been talking about as well. So accounting for me, I guess, Anna, you were talking about this notion of moving from, or kind of making data platform ready. And I think what accounting or accounting framework helps us think about is how data points need to be made capital ready. And just as Ganaele was saying, there needs to be a certain vocabulary or rethinking of what the terms are and the calculation that goes into them. So I think for me, there's an added step that we need to attach on to many of the discussions that we've been having, and that is the very rewriting of the terms of this rationality. So I guess I'm using the word accountability as a more social or political, juridical to an extent, or governmental term that helps to capture some values, some social values behind that more data-defined notion of relationality. That is accountability itself. How are we, or in what ways should be accountable to each other, and what are those terms? And who gets to define what those terms are and what the language is? And so I think that is really that is the business plan. For me, that is the business plan of platforms like Facebook, is to become an accounting platform, is to set the terms for capital under capitalism that strives to search for new sites of profit in our contemporary economic situation.
It resonates what Carolin ended up with in relation to data point critique of the public debate about metrics and their kind of role in this. So that has a kind of accountability role there as well, I'm sure. Audience, old-fashioned way, hands up. There's one here. Can we get the mic? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for very interesting talks. I wanted to ask a question to Carolin. Kind of following this talk about shaming and what we're talking about, like evaluation, revaluation. Can you imagine a metric that will take this into account? I mean, this whole idea of valuation, so that you go beyond this paradox you're talking about, how there seems to be, of course, people are talking about very different things, but they're all rendered into these standardized units within the social platform. Can you imagine a metric that would actually take this valuation into account? Talk about qualities maybe instead of quantifying everything.
You mean a metric that would value alongside different criteria than shaming? A metric that would be more aligned with users' criteria of evaluation, or I'm not exactly sure what. Yeah,
maybe just opening up instead of.
What kind of metric do people want? So I think 2 weeks ago we were having a similar discussion at the Digital Methods Winter School, and the question came up: what is a people's metric or users' metric? Are you going into that direction?
Maybe just like defining value in a critical sense beyond being trapped between everything being totally standardized. Despite the fact that people, like you bring up this example with tweeting about Ukraine or promoting your own portfolio or whatever.
Yeah, how can we define value in social media that is not numbered, that is not turned into kind of comparable units, that is maybe singular in a sense that it kind of refuses to be metrified. So I find it very difficult to think along these lines, because that pushes you very easy into a way of just situating this kind of form of value in the area of what cannot be counted, really blaming everything that is being counted as problematic, which is a kind of a dichotomy that I don't necessarily want to make up. I'm afraid I would have to kind of think longer on your question. I think the answer is not to make it not countable, but what kind of answer there could be. Maybe more kind of artistic forms of expression,
So maybe I'll just follow up on your question and also in relation to Carolin. So, for example, if we're talking about this whole happy web space that Facebook also contributed to with like the like button, which basically sets up one metric, which is ideally a happy metric, of course. And now with the image I showed with the graph, it's asking for more kinds of verbs. So also to create like more, maybe a mundane web. So in response to, can we have either or, like the like and happy web and the shaming web? Like it's setting up It's asking for verbs that are very mundane, very boring. So John is reading a book. So it's trying to also make those mundane actions, like data points that can be commodified. But what's interesting about that is that even developers can create their own actions. Those will have to be verified by Facebook. So one would say, I'm finally going to make a dislike action. That's not possible. You cannot hate things on Facebook either. So Facebook is prohibiting for a specific set of actions. So thereby it's creating this middle ground, but that whole hate web, like Facebook won't allow it also because it's not profitable for, you're not going to sell your advertisers hate. You only want them either to do like the happy stuff, things people like, enjoy, and share, or the mundane stuff, because that's also profitable. So that was another answer.
And to add to that, I think it's very difficult to kind of really think outside of economic valorization here, because even if you start imagining how else can we value the data that we count here, this is always a kind of business opportunities for third-party platforms. So for instance, with a colleague, Johannes Passmann, we've been doing research on a Twitter favorite button, which has at least two very kind of clearly demarcated use practices that gives very different value to the Twitter favorite. The majority of people probably uses this as a bookmark. I've seen an interesting tweet, let's save it for later. But there's a very big community, especially in Germany, that uses the favorite button as a kind of indication for acknowledgement. And therewith a popularity measure. And there are third-party platforms that cater to both youth practices, that allow you to export your FAFs into your kind of bookmarking system, and that turn FAF data into popularity rankings such as FAFstar. That is really very much catering to the community that uses the FAF as popularity measure. So again, trying to think of alternative ways to kind of recombine the metrics, open up, again, business opportunities.
Good. We have time for one more question. So who's going to be? Who wants to have the last word? At least second to last word. Otherwise, it's going to be me. You don't want that. Questions, comments, last question, anything, feedback? Great.
Well, I thought it was, I just wanted to say, I thought it was just an incredibly fantastic panel. I so enjoyed it. And actually, it did the work that I think sort of wasn't done yesterday in terms of filling out things. And I mean, in my head as a science and technology studies scholar, I heard a paper on sort of infrastructure, I heard a paper on sort of, the technology of agency, I heard all sorts of things in the various papers, and I thought they went sort of beautifully together actually and were sort of very nuanced. So I just wanted to say I thought it was fantastic, and thank you very much.
I think that's a brilliant way of ending. Thank you very much, panel. Thank you very much. And just as a reminder, amongst so many good panels that are still forthcoming, there will be also screening at 8, where Greg, me, and a third person will be joining as well. And so we're going to have a screening of Preempting Dissent. You're all welcome. Thank you.